The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered general store, and Delilah Fletcher stepped down onto the dusty street of South Pass City, Wyoming, wearing a dress that belonged to someone else, shoes that pinched her feet terribly, and carrying nothing but a small carpet bag containing 2 letters and a worn Bible. She had pawned everything she owned back in Boston just to afford the train ticket west, and the woman at the charity mission had given her these borrowed clothes when her own had become too threadbare to be decent. The August heat of 1878 pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath the high collar of the green calico dress that was a size too large and smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. Delilah smoothed her hands over the fabric nervously as she scanned the street for any sign of Xavier Young, the rancher who had answered her advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper. They had exchanged exactly 3 letters over the course of 4 months, and in his most recent correspondence, he had promised to meet her at the general store on this exact date. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched miners and ranch hands go about their business, none of them paying her much attention. South Pass City had seen better days since the gold rush had faded, but it still bustled with enough activity to make her feel small and insignificant. "Miss Fletcher." The voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain. Delilah spun around and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that he quickly removed when their gazes met, revealing dark hair that needed a trim. His hands, she noticed, were calloused and strong, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything he had. "Yes, I am Delilah Fletcher," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And you must be Mr. Young, Xavier," he said quickly. "Just Xavier, please." He studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "I hope your journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Delilah admitted. "But I am here now, and grateful for the opportunity." The words sounded formal and stiff to her own ears, but she did not know what else to say. How did one greet the man one had agreed to marry through letters alone? Xavier seemed equally uncertain. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "I have a wagon waiting. My ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought we could go see the preacher first if you are willing. I know we discussed waiting a few days in the letters, but Reverend Michaels is leaving tomorrow to visit his sister in Cheyenne, and he will not be back for 3 weeks. Delilah felt her stomach flip. She had hoped for at least a day or two to adjust, to get to know this stranger before binding herself to him forever. But she had no money for lodging, and she could see the practicality in his suggestion. Besides, she had come all this way precisely for this purpose. "That would be fine," she heard herself say. Something shifted in Xavier's expression, relief perhaps. "I want you to know," he said quietly, stepping closer so that his words would not carry to the people passing by. "I will not expect anything from you tonight, or any night until you are ready. I know this is strange for both of us, but I mean to treat you with respect." The sincerity in his voice made Delilah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In Boston, after her father had died and left her with nothing but debts, she had faced propositions from men who saw her desperation as an opportunity. Xavier's promise meant more than he could possibly know. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked together to the small church at the end of the street, Xavier keeping a respectful distance between them. Reverend Michaels was a portly man with kind eyes who seemed unsurprised by their request. He asked them both the required questions, had them repeat their vows, and within 15 minutes, Delilah Fletcher became Delilah Young. She had no ring and neither did Xavier, but when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier gently squeezed her hand. It was the first time he had touched her, and his palm was warm and rough against hers. The wagon ride to the ranch gave Delilah her first real look at Wyoming territory. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, with rolling hills covered in sagebrush stretching toward distant mountains that looked blue in the afternoon light. Xavier pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his voice growing more animated as he talked about the land. She learned that he had built his ranch from nothing over the past 6 years, that he raised cattle and horses, and that he lived alone except for 2 hired hands who had their own cabin on the property. "Why did you decide to seek a wife through the matrimonial paper?" Delilah asked as the wagon bounced over a rough section of road. It was a bold question, but they were married now, and she wanted to understand. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horses. "It gets lonely out here," he finally said. "I wanted someone to share my life with, to build something with. And I suppose I am not very good at courting. I never seem to know what to say to women at the social gatherings in town." He glanced at her, a slight flush coloring his weathered cheeks. Writing letters was easier somehow. "What about you? Why did you answer my advertisement?" Delilah considered how much to reveal. "My father died 6 months ago," she said carefully. "He was a clerk, and we never had much, but we managed. After he passed, I discovered he owed money to some dangerous people. They came to collect, and when I could not pay, they made it clear I had 2 choices. I could work off the debt in ways I would not choose, or I could disappear. So I sold everything I had and used the money to head west. Your letter seemed honest and kind. I thought perhaps I might find a new life here." "Those clothes," Xavier said suddenly, and Delilah felt her face burn with shame. "They are borrowed, are they not? You mentioned in your letter that you had a few dresses, but I can see that one does not fit you properly." Tears stung Delilah's eyes. She had hoped he would not notice or would be too polite to mention it. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I am sorry for the deception. I had to sell my own clothing to afford food on the journey. The charity mission in Cheyenne gave me these before I took the stage to South Pass City. I have nothing else." To her surprise, Xavier did not seem angry. Instead, he made a low sound of distress. "And I am the fool who rushed you to the church instead of taking you to the dry goods store first." "Delilah, I am sorry. We will remedy this as soon as possible." "I do not expect you to spend money on me right away," Delilah said quickly. "I can make do with what I have." "You are my wife now," Xavier said firmly, "and I will give you everything you truly need. That includes proper clothing that fits you and is yours to keep. It includes a warm home and food on the table and anything else that makes you comfortable. I did not marry you to watch you struggle." The conviction in his words made Delilah's chest ache. She had not expected kindness, not really. She had hoped for safety and stability, but Xavier was offering something more. "Thank you," she managed to say around the lump in her throat. The ranch appeared in the distance, nestled in a valley with a creek running alongside it. The main house was modest but well built, constructed of logs with a stone chimney. There were several outbuildings, including a barn and what Xavier identified as the bunkhouse for his hired men. As they drew closer, Delilah could see horses in a corral and cattle grazing in a nearby pasture. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made her heart beat faster. 2 men emerged from the barn as Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop. One was older, perhaps in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, closer to Xavier's age, with sandy hair and an easy smile. Both of them stopped short when they saw Delilah. "Frank, Tom, this is my wife, Delilah," Xavier announced as he jumped down from the wagon and then turned to help her down. His hands were gentle but sure as he lifted her, and he set her on the ground carefully. "Delilah, these are my hired hands. Frank Donnelly has been with me since the beginning, and Tom Mercer joined us last spring." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Young," Frank said, tipping his hat respectfully. Tom did the same, though his eyes were wide with surprise. "We did not know you were getting married today, boss," Tom said. "Congratulations to you both." "It was a quick decision," Xavier admitted. "The Reverend is leaving town tomorrow. I will want you both to give Mrs. Young the same respect you give me. She is the lady of this ranch now, and her word is law." Something warm unfurled in Delilah's chest at his words. He was not just giving her a place to live, but acknowledging her as an equal partner. "Thank you for the welcome," she said to the two men. "I hope we will work well together." Frank grinned. "I reckon having a woman around will improve things considerably, madam. Maybe we will finally get some decent cooking." Xavier shot him a look but could not quite hide his smile. "My cooking is not that terrible." "Yes, it is, boss," Tom said cheerfully, "but we eat it anyway because we like living here." The easy banter between the men made Delilah relax slightly. This place felt lived in and real, not the cold, unfamiliar environment she had feared. Xavier excused them and guided her toward the house with a hand at the small of her back. The touch was light but unmistakably possessive, and Delilah found she did not mind it. The interior of the house was sparse but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a table with 4 chairs, a few cabinets, and a rocking chair near the fireplace. A doorway led to what Delilah assumed was the bedroom, and Xavier gestured toward it somewhat awkwardly. "That is the bedroom," he confirmed. "I can sleep out here on the floor tonight if you would prefer privacy." "This is your home," Delilah said. "I would not turn you out of your own bed." She took a deep breath, feeling her face heat. "We are married now. I do not expect you to sleep on the floor." Xavier studied her carefully. "Are you certain? I meant what I said earlier." "I am certain," Delilah said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. Xavier had been nothing but kind and respectful since the moment they met. She trusted him not to hurt her, which was more than she had expected from this arrangement. They spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange dance of learning about each other while completing necessary tasks. Xavier showed her around the house, explaining where everything was kept and how the stove worked. Delilah watched and listened, committing everything to memory. She prepared their first meal together, using the ingredients she found in the kitchen, simple fare of beans and cornbread and bacon, but Xavier ate it with genuine appreciation. "This is excellent," he said. "Much better than anything I make." "It is basic cooking," Delilah protested, but she felt pleased nonetheless. "Maybe so, but it tastes like someone cared about preparing it," Xavier said. "That makes all the difference." After the meal, they sat together on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The evening air was cooler, carrying the scent of sagebrush and grass. Delilah had removed the pinching shoes and tucked her feet under her skirt, relief flooding through her at being free of them. "Your feet hurt," Xavier observed. "Those shoes do not fit you either, do they?" "They are a bit small," Delilah admitted. "But they were all the mission had in my size, or close to it." Xavier made that sound of distress again. "Tomorrow, first thing, we are going to town. I am getting you proper clothes and shoes that fit, and anything else you need. I will not have my wife suffering because of borrowed things that do not suit her." "Xavier, you do not have to do all that immediately," Delilah said. "I know ranching is hard work and money can be tight. I do not want to be a burden." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Delilah, You are not a burden. I have been saving money for years now with nothing to spend it on but the ranch. I want to do this. I want to give you everything you truly need, everything you should have had all along. Will you let me?" The earnestness in his voice made Delilah's eyes sting with tears for the second time that day. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. When the air grew too cool, Xavier led her inside and showed her to the bedroom. It was a simple room with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The bed was larger than Delilah expected, which eased some of her nervousness. Xavier gave her privacy to change into the nightgown that had also been provided by the charity mission, another borrowed item that hung loosely on her frame. When she emerged, he was waiting respectfully outside the door in his own nightclothes. They climbed into bed together, Xavier staying carefully on his side and Delilah on hers with a good foot of space between them. "Good night, Delilah," Xavier said softly into the darkness. "Good night, Xavier," she replied. Despite her exhaustion from the long journey and the emotional upheaval of the day, Delilah lay awake for a long time, acutely aware of the man beside her. His breathing was steady and even, and eventually she realized he had fallen asleep. Only then did she allow herself to relax, her body finally accepting that she was safe, that this strange new life might actually be a good thing. Morning came early on the ranch. Delilah woke to find Xavier already gone from the bed, and she could hear movement in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in the borrowed green dress and ventured out to find him frying eggs and bacon. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. "I hope I did not wake you. I am used to rising early to handle the animals." "I am an early riser myself," Delilah said, "or at least I can be." "Let me help." They prepared breakfast together, and then Xavier went out to speak with Frank and Tom about the day's work. When he returned, he hitched the horses to the wagon again. "Ready to go to town?" he asked. The ride back to South Pass City felt different in the morning light with Xavier as her husband rather than a stranger. He talked more freely now, telling her stories about the ranch and the area, about the harsh winters and the challenges of keeping cattle alive in this unforgiving landscape. Delilah listened and asked questions, genuinely interested in understanding the life she had entered. At the dry goods store, Xavier was true to his word. He insisted she pick out fabric for at least 3 dresses, along with ready-made undergarments, stockings, and 2 pairs of shoes that actually fit. When Delilah protested at the expense, he simply shook his head. "You need these things," he said firmly, "and I want you to have them. Pick what you like, not just what is practical." So Delilah, hesitantly at first and then with growing confidence, selected fabrics in colors that appealed to her. A soft blue cotton, a warm brown wool for winter, and a pretty rose-colored calico. The shopkeeper, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patterson, helped her pick out buttons and thread to match. "Are you handy with a needle?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Yes, madam," Delilah confirmed. "My mother taught me to sew before she passed." "Wonderful," Xavier said. "Though if you would rather have Mrs. Patterson or someone else make the dresses, that can be arranged." "I would enjoy making them myself," Delilah said. "It will give me something to do, and I like sewing." They purchased shoes next, 2 sturdy pairs that fit perfectly, and Delilah immediately changed into 1 pair, sighing with relief as her feet were finally comfortable. Xavier also insisted on buying her a warm cloak for the coming winter, a few hair ribbons, and a new brush and comb set that made Delilah gasp at the expense. "Xavier, this is too much," she protested. "It is what you need," he countered, "and I will not hear another word about it." Before they left town, Xavier stopped at the general store and purchased supplies including candy sticks and coffee and other small luxuries that Delilah knew he probably did without most of the time. "We are celebrating," he explained when she raised an eyebrow at the candy. "It is not every day a man gets married." On the ride back, Delilah felt lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. The packages surrounding her in the wagon represented a new beginning, a chance to build something real. And Xavier, despite being essentially a stranger, treated her with more kindness than most of the people she had known in Boston. "Thank you," she said quietly as they approached the ranch, "for everything, for giving me what I truly need." Xavier glanced at her, his expression soft. "You are my wife, Delilah. Taking care of you is not a burden or an obligation. It is something I want to do." Over the following weeks, Delilah settled into life on the ranch. She spent her days sewing her new dresses, cooking meals, and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Xavier was patient with her questions and seemed genuinely pleased to have her there. He taught her about the animals, showed her how to identify the different cattle brands, and explained the work that went into maintaining the property. Frank and Tom treated her with respect and appreciation, especially after she started baking pies and bread in addition to the regular meals. She learned that Frank was a widower whose wife had died 5 years prior in childbirth, along with their baby. Tom was young and unattached, sending most of his earnings back to his family in Kansas. Both men had become like family to Xavier over the years. In the evenings, Delilah and Xavier would sit together and talk. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, how he had headed west after his parents died in a cholera outbreak, determined to build something of his own. He learned about her life in Boston, her years spent keeping house for her father and her grief at losing him. These conversations, more than anything else, began to weave them together into a real partnership. At night, they still maintained a respectful distance in bed, but it was gradually shrinking. Sometimes Delilah would wake to find Xavier's hand near hers on the quilt, or she would drowsily roll closer to his warmth. Neither of them acknowledged these small intimacies, but Delilah was aware of them all the same. One evening, about a month after her arrival, a storm rolled in suddenly. The wind howled around the house and rain pounded against the roof. Delilah had never experienced a Wyoming storm before, and the ferocity of it frightened her. When lightning split the sky and thunder shook the walls, she could not help the small gasp of fear that escaped her lips. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked from his side of the bed. "I am fine," Delilah said, but her voice shook. The storms in Boston were never quite like this. Without a word, Xavier moved closer and pulled her gently against his chest. "You are safe," he murmured. "The house is solid. We have weathered worse storms than this." Delilah allowed herself to relax into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He was warm and solid and reassuring, and gradually her fear subsided. They stayed like that for the rest of the night, and when morning came, neither of them moved away. That night marked a change in their relationship. They began sleeping closer together, and Xavier would often put his arm around her. The touches were still chaste, but they carried an affection that had been growing between them. Delilah found herself looking forward to these moments of closeness, to the comfort of being held by someone who cared about her well-being. Fall arrived with stunning displays of gold and red in the aspens on the mountainsides. The work on the ranch intensified as Xavier and his men prepared for winter, repairing buildings and storing hay. Delilah helped where she could, and she spent time preserving vegetables and meat for the cold months ahead. One afternoon in late October, Xavier came in from working with an injured hand. He had caught it on a piece of barbed wire while repairing a fence, and the cut was deep and bleeding heavily. Delilah immediately took charge, cleaning the wound with hot water and whiskey, then wrapping it carefully with clean bandages. "You should be more careful," she scolded gently as she worked. "This could have been much worse." "Yes, madam," Xavier said, watching her face as she concentrated on her task. "I am lucky to have a wife who knows how to patch me up." Delilah looked up and found him gazing at her with an expression that made her breath catch. It was warm and tender and unmistakably affectionate. "Xavier," she said softly. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been for a while now, but I wanted you to know. I do not expect you to feel the same way, not yet, but I needed to tell you." Delilah's heart thundered in her chest. She had been falling too, slowly but surely, won over by his kindness and his steady presence and the way he looked at her like she was precious. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "You have given me everything I truly need. A home, security, respect. But more than that, you have given me yourself, your patience, and your care. How could I not love you for that?" Xavier reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Delilah whispered. The kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise of more to come. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. That night, their marriage became a real one in every sense, and Delilah discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like she had feared. Xavier was tender and patient, making sure she was comfortable, and when it was over, he held her close and whispered words of love into her hair. Winter came hard and fast that year. By November, snow had already fallen several times, and the temperature dropped low enough that ice formed on the water troughs every night. The cattle had to be watched carefully to ensure they did not freeze or starve, and Xavier spent long days out in the bitter cold. Delilah worried about him constantly, but she kept the home fires burning and made sure hot food and coffee were always ready when he came in half frozen. She learned to read the weather signs, to predict when a storm was coming, and to prepare accordingly. Frank and Tom often joined them in the main house during the worst of the winter, and Delilah enjoyed cooking for all of them and listening to their stories. Christmas arrived quietly. Delilah had been saving eggs and butter to make special treats, and she surprised Xavier with a cake on Christmas morning. He had bought her a beautiful shawl in secret during a trip to town, soft wool in a deep blue that brought out her eyes. She had knitted him a warm scarf using yarn she had made from wool she had traded eggs for. They exchanged these gifts with shy smiles and warm kisses, and Delilah thought it was the best Christmas she had ever experienced. "I am so grateful you came into my life," Xavier told her that evening as they sat together before the fire. "This place was just a house before. You have made it a home. You gave me a reason to build a life again," Delilah replied. "When I stepped off that stagecoach wearing borrowed clothes and carrying nothing but fear and hope, I never imagined I would find you." They kissed again, and the firelight painted them in gold as snow fell silently outside. In that moment, Delilah felt perfectly content. She had come west with nothing, and she had found everything that mattered. Winter eventually loosened its grip, giving way to a muddy, messy spring. The creek flooded its banks, and everything turned green almost overnight. The cattle gave birth to calves, and Xavier was busy from dawn to dusk helping with difficult births and protecting the newborns from predators. Delilah helped where she could, including sitting up through the night with a weak calf that Xavier was determined to save. "Why do you care so much about this one?" Delilah asked as they took turns feeding the calf milk from a bottle. "You have dozens of calves." "Because every life matters," Xavier said simply. "This little one did not ask to be born weak, and if I can help it survive, then that is what I will do." The calf did survive, growing stronger each day, and Delilah loved Xavier even more for his compassion. It was one of many small moments that deepened her feelings for him. The way he always saved her the best piece of meat at dinner. The way he brought her wildflowers for no reason. The way he held her at night like she was the most precious thing in his world. In May, Delilah realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, and then another, before finally telling Xavier her suspicion. "I think I might be with child," she said one evening after dinner. Xavier's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, and concern. "Are you certain?" "Fairly certain," Delilah confirmed. "I will know for sure in another few weeks, but all the signs are there." He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Delilah asked, though she could feel his answer in the way he held her. "I am beyond happy," Xavier said. "I am terrified and thrilled and overwhelmed." "Are you happy?" "Yes," Delilah said, and she realized it was true. A year ago she could not have imagined wanting to bring a child into the world, but now, with Xavier, in this life they had built together, she wanted it very much. "I am very happy." The pregnancy progressed well, though Delilah experienced sickness in the mornings for the first few months. Xavier fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and not overwork herself. Frank and Tom were delighted at the news, and they both went out of their way to help with tasks around the house, so Delilah would not strain herself. As summer arrived and Delilah's belly began to swell noticeably, Xavier grew increasingly protective. He accompanied her everywhere she went, even just to the garden or the chicken coop. She found it endearing, though sometimes frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to carry her over a small puddle. "I know," Xavier said. "But you are carrying the most important thing in my world. Let me be cautious." How could she argue with that? So Delilah allowed him his protectiveness and focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Xavier built a beautiful cradle out of smooth pine wood. Mrs. Patterson from the dry goods store became a good friend, offering advice and reassurance about childbirth and motherhood. In early September, as the leaves were just beginning to turn again, Delilah went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was certain she could not endure another minute. But Xavier stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted with many births, guided them through it with calm expertise. Finally, after nearly 20 hours of labor, Delilah gave birth to a son. The baby was small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that announced his arrival to the world. When Mrs. Patterson placed the squalling infant in Delilah's arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at his son. "You are both perfect." They named him Daniel Xavier Young, and he became the center of their world. Xavier was a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with feedings and changing diapers without complaint. Delilah had never seen him happier than when he held Daniel, talking to him in a soft voice about the ranch and the life he would grow up in. The first year of Daniel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. He was a happy baby who smiled early and laughed often. Xavier would carry him around the ranch, showing him everything and explaining how things worked even though Daniel was far too young to understand. Delilah would watch them together and feel overwhelmed with love for both of them. When Daniel was 18 months old, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more prepared, though the pregnancy proved more difficult than the first. She was sick more often and tired more easily, but Xavier was endlessly patient and supportive. Daniel, now a toddling bundle of energy, kept them both entertained with his antics. Their daughter was born in April of 1881, 3 years after Delilah had first arrived in South Pass City. The birth was faster this time, and the baby girl was larger and healthier than Daniel had been. They named her Grace Delilah Young, and she had her father's whiskey-colored eyes and her mother's delicate features. With 2 children, the house felt full and alive in ways Delilah had never experienced growing up as an only child. Daniel was a gentle big brother, always wanting to help with the baby. Xavier expanded the house, adding another bedroom so the children would have their own space as they grew. The ranch continued to prosper. Xavier's hard work and careful management paid off, and they were able to hire another hand and purchase more land. Frank and Tom remained with them, becoming like uncles to the children. Frank taught Daniel to whittle, and Tom would swing both children around until they shrieked with laughter. Life was not without its challenges. One summer, a drought nearly devastated their herd, and they lost several cattle. Another year, Daniel fell ill with a fever that terrified them both, though he recovered fully. There were hard winters and accidents and all the normal struggles of ranch life. But through it all, Delilah and Xavier faced everything together. Their love had only deepened over the years, maturing from those first tentative feelings into something solid and enduring. They knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with just a look, and still found joy in each other's company. One evening in the summer of 1885, Delilah and Xavier sat on the porch watching Daniel, now 6 and Grace 4, playing in the yard. Frank and Tom had just finished building the children a small playhouse, and both children were thrilled with their new space. "You remember the day we met?" Xavier asked, taking Delilah's hand in his. "Of course," Delilah said. "How could I forget? I was wearing that awful borrowed dress and those terrible shoes. I was terrified and hopeful in equal measure." "I was terrified too," Xavier admitted. "I kept thinking you would take one look at this rough ranch and me and decide you had made a terrible mistake. But then you stayed and you made this place come alive. You gave me everything I truly needed, even though I was supposed to be the one giving that to you." Delilah squeezed his hand. "We gave those things to each other," she said. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person providing everything, but 2 people building something together that neither could create alone." "When did you become so wise?" Xavier asked with a smile. "I have always been wise," Delilah teased. "You just did not notice because you were too busy worrying about my shoes." They both laughed, and Daniel looked over at the sound, his face lighting up. "Mama, Papa, come see our house," he called. "We are coming," Xavier called back. He stood and offered Delilah his hand, pulling her to her feet. Together, they walked across the yard to admire their children's new playhouse, and Delilah felt a rush of gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. She had come to South Pass City with nothing but borrowed clothes and desperate hope. Xavier had promised to give her everything she truly needed, and he had kept that promise. But more than the physical things, the house and the clothes and the security, he had given her love. Real, enduring, transformative love that had rebuilt her from the inside out. And she had given him the same in return, along with a family and a home filled with laughter and warmth. They had built something beautiful together in this harsh landscape, something that would endure long after they were gone. As summer faded into fall and then winter again, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Daniel started attending the small school in South Pass City 3 days a week, riding in with Xavier when he went to town for supplies. Grace was already begging to join him, though Delilah insisted she wait another year. The winter of 1885 brought heavy snows, and the family spent many evenings gathered around the fireplace. Xavier would read aloud from books they had acquired over the years, while Delilah sewed and the children played at their feet. These were the moments Delilah treasured most, the simple everyday magic of being together. In the spring of 1886, Delilah discovered she was pregnant for a third time. She was 32 now, and this pregnancy felt different from the start. She was more tired and her body ached in new ways. Xavier worried constantly, but Delilah reassured him that many women had babies well into their 30s and beyond. Their third child, a son they named William Frank Young in honor of their loyal friend, was born in November. The birth was difficult, and afterward, the doctor told them plainly that Delilah should not have any more children. The risk was too great. Xavier had been shaken by how hard the birth was, and he readily agreed. "We have been blessed with 3 healthy children," he told Delilah as she recovered. "I will not risk your life for more. You are too precious to me." Delilah felt both relieved and a little sad at the finality of it, but she knew it was the right decision. She had 3 beautiful children and a husband who loved her deeply. It was more than enough. William was a fussy baby, unlike his siblings, and Delilah spent many nights walking the floor with him while Xavier helped however he could. Daniel and Grace were fascinated by their new brother, though Grace complained that he cried too much. "You cried too when you were a baby," Delilah told her daughter. "That is what babies do." "Well, it is very loud," Grace said seriously, and Xavier had to hide his laughter behind his hand. As the years passed, the children grew. Daniel became a skilled rider and showed a real aptitude for ranch work. By the time he was 10, he was helping Xavier with real tasks, not just the simple chores he had done as a younger child. Grace was whip-smart and inquisitive, always asking questions about everything. William, as he grew out of his fussy baby stage, revealed himself to be a sweet-natured child with a particular love for animals. Frank retired from active ranch work when his joints grew too stiff, but he stayed on in a small cabin Xavier built for him, spending his days whittling toys for the children and telling them stories. Tom eventually married a widow from town and moved into South Pass City, though he remained a frequent visitor and close friend. Xavier and Delilah grew older together, their hair gaining silver threads and their faces gaining lines. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared joys and sorrows, by children raised and challenges overcome. On a warm evening in June of 1893, Delilah and Xavier celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The children had planned a surprise celebration with the help of several friends from town. There was food and music, and someone had even brought a photographer to take a family portrait. As Delilah stood next to Xavier with their 3 children arranged around them, waiting for the photographer to ready his camera, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. 15 years ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach wearing borrowed clothes and carrying borrowed courage, unsure if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Instead, she had found her home, not just in this place, though she loved the ranch and Wyoming's wild beauty, but in Xavier, in the family they had created, in the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The camera flashed, capturing that moment forever. 3 days later, when the photograph arrived, Delilah studied it carefully. There was Xavier, still handsome despite the years, his hand resting protectively on Daniel's shoulder. There she was, standing beside him with Grace in front of her and William next to his father. They all looked happy and healthy and whole. She had everything she truly needed. Everything that mattered. Daniel took over more and more of the ranch work as he grew into a young man. By the time he was 18, he was capable of running the place himself, though Xavier still oversaw everything. Grace, at 16, had become a skilled seamstress and helped Delilah with all the household tasks. She also had a beau in town, a young clerk named Peter who worked at the bank. William, at 12, was still finding his way but showed promise in training horses. Xavier and Delilah watched their children grow with pride and occasional melancholy. Where did the time go? Xavier wondered one evening as they sat on the porch, just the two of them. The children were all elsewhere, busy with their own pursuits. "I do not know," Delilah admitted. "It seems like just yesterday that Daniel was a baby, and now he is talking about starting his own family someday." "Do you have any regrets?" Xavier asked. "About coming here, about marrying me, about this life?" Delilah turned to him, taking in his beloved face, older now but still the same man who had promised to give her everything she truly needed. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This has been the life I was always meant to live. I just had to come west to find it." Xavier pulled her close, and they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains, the same view they had shared thousands of times over the years. The ranch was quiet and peaceful, the work done for the day. In 1895, Daniel married a local rancher's daughter named Catherine, a sensible young woman with a good head for numbers. They built a house on the far edge of Xavier and Delilah's property, and Daniel began building his own herd of cattle. The following year, they had a daughter, making Xavier and Delilah grandparents for the first time. Grace married Peter in 1897, and they moved into a house in South Pass City above the bank. William, now 15, had decided he wanted to join the army when he turned 18, a decision that terrified Delilah but that Xavier supported. "The world is changing," Xavier told her when she expressed her fears. "If this is what William wants, we should support him. We raised him to be strong and capable. We have to trust that." Delilah knew he was right, though it did not make the idea of her youngest child going off to war any easier to bear. But she remembered her own mother's words about letting children find their own paths, and she resolved to support William's choice. Time continued its steady march forward. Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1898, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. Tom's wife died the following year, and he moved back to the ranch, living in the foreman's cabin and helping manage the growing operation. Xavier and Delilah grew older still, their children now adults with lives of their own. But they still had each other, and their love had only deepened with time. They knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. A touch, a look, a small gesture could communicate volumes. On a crisp autumn morning in 1900, Delilah woke before dawn and watched the sunrise paint the sky outside their bedroom window. She was 52 years old now, and Xavier was 54. They had been married for 22 years, though it felt both like a lifetime and like no time at all. Xavier stirred beside her and pulled her closer. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Delilah replied, settling into his embrace. "I was just thinking about the day I arrived here. Do you remember?" "Of course," Xavier said. "You were wearing that green dress that did not fit right and those terrible shoes. You looked beautiful and terrified." "I was terrified," Delilah admitted. "I had no idea what I was walking into. I thought maybe I was making a horrible mistake." "And now?" Xavier asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," Delilah said. "Coming here, marrying you, building this life. You kept your promise, Xavier. You gave me everything I truly needed." "We gave those things to each other," Xavier said, echoing words Delilah had spoken years earlier. That is what love is. They lay together in comfortable silence as the sun rose higher, bathing the room in golden light. Outside, the ranch was waking up. They could hear cattle lowing and horses nickering and the sounds of Tom starting his morning chores. Eventually, they rose and began their own day. Delilah made breakfast while Xavier went to check on the animals. When he returned, they ate together and talked about their plans for the day. It was an ordinary morning, no different from thousands of other mornings they had shared. But it was also extraordinary in its ordinariness, in the simple joy of being together after more than 2 decades. They had weathered storms and struggles, celebrated triumphs and mourned losses. They had raised children and built a successful ranch and created a life rich with meaning. As autumn gave way to winter and then to spring again, Xavier and Delilah continued their life together. Daniel and Catherine had 2 more children, and Grace had 3. William did join the army but wrote home regularly, his letters filled with tales of his adventures. Xavier's health began to decline slightly as he entered his late 50s. His joints ached more, and he tired more easily. But he refused to slow down significantly, insisting he still had plenty of good years left. Delilah worried but did not push, knowing that the ranch was as much a part of Xavier as breathing. In the spring of 1903, when Delilah was 55 and Xavier was 57, they took a trip together to Cheyenne. It was the first time they had left the ranch for more than a day in years, and it felt like a great adventure. They stayed in a real hotel and ate at restaurants and bought gifts for their grandchildren. On their last evening in Cheyenne, they attended a theatrical performance at the Opera House. Delilah wore her finest dress, one she had sewn herself from beautiful fabric Xavier had bought for her birthday. Xavier wore his best suit and looked distinguished and handsome. As they walked back to their hotel that night, Xavier took her hand. "This has been wonderful," he said. "We should do this more often." "We should," Delilah agreed. "Though I do miss the ranch, as do I," Xavier said. "But it is good to have adventures together, even small ones." They returned home to find everything running smoothly under Tom and Daniel's capable management. The grandchildren had grown noticeably even in the week they had been gone, and Grace had news that she was expecting her 4th child. Life settled back into its familiar patterns. Xavier continued to work the ranch with Daniel's help, and Delilah managed the household and spent time with her growing brood of grandchildren. They now had 7 grandchildren in total, ranging from infants to young children, and each one was precious to them. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Delilah reflected on how full her life had become. The lonely, desperate woman who had arrived in South Pass City, wearing borrowed clothes, seemed like a different person entirely. That woman had been afraid and uncertain, clinging to hope but not truly believing things could get better. But they had gotten better. They had gotten wonderful. Xavier had kept his promise to give her everything she truly needed, but more importantly, they had built something together. A family, a home, a love that had sustained them through everything life threw their way. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "Everything," Delilah said. "How blessed we are, how grateful I am for this life for you." Xavier reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I am the one who should be grateful," he said. "You took a chance on a rough cowboy you had never met and made him the happiest man alive." "We took a chance on each other," Delilah corrected, "and it paid off better than either of us could have imagined." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, They could hear their grandchildren playing and the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Everything was as it should be. As the stars began to appear overhead, Xavier pulled Delilah closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They had been sitting like this for more than 20 years now, and it never got old. This simple intimacy, this quiet togetherness, was worth more than all the gold in California. "I love you," Xavier said softly, "more now than ever." "I love you too," Delilah replied, "always and forever." The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. William eventually left the army and returned home, bringing with him a wife he had met in Denver. They settled on a portion of the ranch land and started their own family. All three of the young children were now married with children of their own, and Xavier and Delilah watched their family grow with deep satisfaction. By 1910, Xavier was 64 and Delilah was 62. They had been married for 32 years, and they now had 14 grandchildren. The ranch was thriving under Daniel's primary management, though Xavier still oversaw important decisions. They had hired several more hands over the years, and the operation had grown significantly from those early days when it was just Xavier, Frank, and Tom. Delilah's hair was now completely white, and Xavier's was mostly gray with a few stubborn dark strands. They both moved a bit slower than they used to, and there were days when the aches and pains of age made things difficult. But they still had each other, and that was what mattered most. One spring morning, Delilah woke to find Xavier watching her with a tender expression. "Good morning," she said, smiling at him. "Good morning, my love," he replied. "I was just thinking about how beautiful you still are." "You are a biased observer," Delilah said, though she felt pleased. "Perhaps," Xavier agreed, "but I stand by my assessment. You are beautiful inside and out, and I am lucky to have spent these years with you." "We are both lucky," Delilah said, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "To have found each other, to have built this life together. Not everyone gets that." "No, they do not," Xavier agreed. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I would not trade a single day with you for anything." They rose together and began another day, their movements coordinated from decades of partnership. Delilah made breakfast while Xavier tended to a few light chores. They ate together and then spent the morning working in the garden Delilah had expanded over the years. In the afternoon, Catherine brought the grandchildren for a visit, and the house filled with noise and laughter. Xavier sat in his rocking chair and let the children climb on him, telling them stories about the old days. Delilah made cookies and watched her family with a full heart. This was everything she had needed, everything she had hoped for, when she stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago. Xavier had promised to give her what she truly needed, and he had done that and more. But the greatest gift had been his love, constant and true, a foundation upon which they had built an extraordinary life. As evening fell and Catherine gathered her children to head home, Delilah and Xavier waved goodbye from the porch. The setting sun painted everything in warm light, and Xavier put his arm around Delilah's shoulders. "Another good day," he said contentedly. "Another perfect day," Delilah corrected. They stayed on the porch as darkness fell, neither wanting to go inside quite yet. The night was mild and the stars were bright overhead. After a while, Xavier began to sing softly, an old song from his childhood. Delilah joined in on the chorus, her voice blending with his. When the song ended, they stayed wrapped in each other's arms, warm and content. They had been through so much together, had built something lasting and true. The scared young woman in borrowed clothes and the lonely cowboy had found exactly what they needed in each other. "Thank you," Delilah whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Xavier asked. "For everything," Delilah said. "For giving me a home, a family, a life worth living, for loving me." "Thank you for the same," Xavier replied. "We saved each other, I think." "Yes," Delilah agreed. "We did." They stood together under the stars, two people who had taken a chance on love and won. Their story had begun with uncertainty and fear, but it had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. They had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, raised children and welcomed grandchildren, built a ranch and a legacy. But most importantly, they had loved each other through all of it, with a love that had only grown stronger with time. Xavier had promised to give Delilah everything she truly needed, and he had kept that promise. But Delilah had given him the same in return, and together they had created something neither could have built alone. As they finally went inside for the night, their hands linked as they had been countless times before, Delilah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come west with nothing but hope and borrowed clothes, and she had found everything that mattered. Home, family, purpose, and love. So much love. That night, as they lay together in the bed they had shared for more than 3 decades, Xavier pulled Delilah close and kissed her forehead. "Sweet dreams, my love," he murmured. "Sweet dreams," Delilah replied, settling into his embrace with a contented sigh. They fell asleep together as they had thousands of times before, two hearts beating in rhythm, two lives so thoroughly intertwined they were impossible to separate. It was a perfect ending to another perfect day in a life filled with them. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the Wyoming mountains, they would wake together and begin another day. There would be work to do and grandchildren to spoil and meals to share. There would be laughter and conversation, and the small, everyday miracles of a life well lived. But through it all, there would be love. The same love that had brought them together all those years ago, that had sustained them through every challenge, that had transformed two lonely people into a family. The love that had proven, beyond any doubt, that sometimes taking a chance on a stranger could lead to finding everything you truly needed and so much more.